We empower our community. Empower our community through our land. Through our land. Through our land.
Welcome to Through Our Lens, the podcast where we focus on empowering the African American community. Today, I have a special guest speaker. I'm so glad that she blessed me with her presence once again, Miss Nicole Ventour.
Hi, Queen. Thanks for having me again.
Hey, today we're going to be discussing from the classroom to confinement, the school to prison pipeline. And this is very personal to me because I sub and I've been subbing since 2012 and I work in law enforcement. And I've seen so many babies that I've subbed for getting 20 years, 30 years. So we have a problem. So I said, let me bring on Miss Ventour to explain this to everyone. Because I know a lot of people, especially for me, I wasn't familiar with what the school to prison pipeline was until something happened with my son. And that's when I started to do the research. Stuff started to come close to home that'll definitely get your attention. And once I started to do the research, I was like, okay. So a combination of the research and then just things I've seen from me just working in both environments, I say, yeah, we definitely have an issue. So thank you again, Queen, for coming on to my platform. First and foremost, can you just explain or just tell my audience about you? Who is Miss Ventour?
Well, my name is Nicole Ventour, and before anything, I am a mother, I am a grandmother, I am a neighbor, I am a sister, I am a daughter, I am a friend, I am everyone. But most importantly, I am a community advocate. I have been advocating for children after treating them and understanding that there were a lot more deeper needs. And when I say treating them, I am a licensed psychotherapist with specialized training in trauma. And as I worked with children, I just identified a greater need than what was being offered. So again, residing here in Lancaster, we don't have enough services, we don't have enough resources. So I had to step out the box. And I tell people that's when you listen to God and you sit down and you sit still, and He will guide you. Because what I was commanded to do, because when He speaks, you got to listen. So what I was commanded to do was be of service. And being of service was ensuring that children and families who were suppressed were receiving the level of support that just was not available to Lancaster. So that's when I began advocating in addition to providing mental health, so I can make sure that I not only help the child or families with mental health conditions, but I also help them improve socially, economically, so that they can be able to live and survive and focus on caring for one another versus being distracted by bills and other concerns that they were not able to to address because of the rural area where we reside.
Well, thank you so much for everything you do.
You're welcome.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
So could you explain what exactly is the school to prison pipeline and why is it a critical issue, especially for the African American community?
Oh gosh, it's the school to prison pipeline is multifaceted, and we have to look at two pipelines, and we just can't look at one, right? There is the school to prison pipeline, and there is also the school to the grave pipeline, right? And unfortunately, in our communities, sometimes those are interchangeable because those who went to the grave from that pipeline are associated with the ones who have went to the prison, right? So what is it really? What happens is that we have individuals who in school not receiving supportive services that they truly need. And while they are in school working to develop academically, there are social barriers that's basically impacting their ability to learn, and to function. So when we're looking at the school dynamics that's going on, that's where it happens first. And when we're starting to see, school massacres, the shootings, what are those, those horrible, shootings in a school. All of those things are associated with a child who was bullied, who was made fun of, who had some type of issue in a school, right? So therefore, we have real issues in a school district that need to be addressed because they're going to translate into problematic behaviors also in a community. Now, let me take a step back. Yes, kids are coming in to the school with these problems, but parents are not equipped to deal with some of the problems, and that's where those services are really needed. And so a lot of children too often are not receiving the supportive services that they require, leading them to drop out of school, leading them to be suspended, leading them to be placed in an alternative school here in Lancaster that we also have to address, because the alternative school just basically changes the setting but don't give them the additional supportive services that they require when they transition back to the traditional school setting. And it also leads to dropout rates. So guess what's happening? A lot of those children, even before dropping out, are already involved in gang activity. And some of those children who do drop out are gravitating or heading towards gang activity because those are the supports and other individuals with problematic behaviors that they can align with. So hence, we now have the school to prison pipeline. Children with problematic behavior dropping out of school or being displaced from school without having appropriate services that's leading them to criminalization, and that's leading them to gang violence. That's leading them to the grave. So the question is, how do we stop that pipeline? Because somewhere in the middle between a grave and also between the prison system is supposed to be supportive services. And that's what we have to target, because that is what the problem is.
So what are some of the key factors that contribute to the disproportionate representation of African American students in the school to prison pipeline? Can you give us some concrete examples?
Can you clarify that?
What are some of the factors that you think that's mainly impacting the African American community, or is it broad?
You know what? It's broad because here in Lancaster, you don't want to tell her how it is. I believe first is racism and then it's classism. And, systemically, the judicial system has incarcerated and sentenced African Americans at a more disproportionate rate to other races and ethnicities. So you can have an African American person, doing the exact same crime as another ethnic group, non-black group, right? And that person is sentenced much more lighter. So we have this huge issue because guess what? Black lives are not valued. And in the eyes of, again, we're rural South Carolina, it's been a history of suppression and racism where Black African Americans have been minimized in terms of the value that they bring to society when we bring so much value. So with that being said, they are feeding off of the history of utilizing us for slave labor. They are breeding and utilizing their history of Black suppression to put us in prison for a given amount of years. Because remember, to them, we only bring a lot of value based on how we can economically be used. We have gone from picking cotton to building chairs and other resources in the prison system, and that's how they define us. This is a normalized legal way of slavery that they continue to profit off of Black labor.
So how does zero tolerance policies in schools, often intended for safety, inadvertently contribute to pushing students, especially African American students, into the juvenile justice system?
One of the things that will happen is that parents need to sue. And if a child is assaulted, my son, case in point, he was assaulted one time, and they attempted to suspend him, and because he fought back. So we watched the video, and he was on the floor like this while the kid was punching him because he was like, "Mama, I did not want to hit back because I knew I would be suspended. So he ended up eventually pushing the child off of him. He got suspended because he pushed the boy off of him after a while because he made contact. So again, he had a 1 day suspension. And at that point in time, I didn't push it, but I should have. Because at some point, the school do not want people fighting. We want to deter from it. But when a person is doing all their due diligence to hinder someone, from assaulting them, at what point do they have a right to protect themselves? And that's what we really have to look at. We have to look at suing these schools because we have a right and our children have a right to make sure that they're protected. Let's make sure that they're doing everything that they can to avoid the interaction, but at some point they have a right. So that zero tolerance, again, is something that I don't believe they're using in terms of feeding the school to prison pipeline, but what they are doing is that they're labeling that child already because that's going on that child's record as having suspensions, and it's created a false narrative of who that child is.
That's true. That's absolutely true. So, what role do implicit biases and systematic racism play in the disproportionate discipline and punishment of African American students?
As I said, it's been doing it already. Looking at African American students, they have a tendency to look at the record, right? But again, going back to the last question, when you're having this record of issues that's presenting itself, is the record a true interpretation of who that person is? But yet they're being viewed and punished based on a record, right? I'm going to use my son again, for example. He was bullied so much in school to the point that he actually had PTSD. He had trauma. And during that time, I was in a relationship and the person was not being the best to my son. And he didn't tell me that until later on, which, ended that relationship very abruptly because I didn't tolerate that. So there were stresses at home and there were stressors in school, right? So as my son was acted out already because of the stressors in school, he was identified as a problematic child, right? But again, the school have a history of suppressing information. They protect teachers who do wrong things. They sit back and they'll take one teacher from one setting who didn't provide or didn't do their due diligence to protect a child, educate a child. And sometimes some of these teachers are sexually assaulting these children, physically assaulting these children, a lot of things that are being suppressed, in these schools districts. So what then happens? We have a narrative of a child who is a problematic person when the school district didn't provide the appropriate and adequate supports to protect children. I had to actually obtain an attorney to make sure that my son's needs were met and to ensure that his IEP was addressed and adhered to, because a lot of these children that we're talking about do indeed have IEPs. And some of these children don't have IEPs, and those are individualized educational plans. Parents, by law, if your child is exhibiting behavioral concerns that is impacting his or her ability to learn and being disruptive, rather than suspending your child under the IDEA law, the school have the ethical and legal obligation to give your child an IEP to put things in place to address those needs. We have to ameliorate those symptoms to ensure that your child can be educated. But when the school is not doing that, giving those supports, they're then labeling the child's problematic behaviors versus putting legally required plans in place to address them. Again, that continues to feed the prison to school pipeline, because then they're not looked at as a child with a disability or with needs. They're looked at simply as a problematic child. And when that child is feeling confused, when that child is feeling upset, or when that child is feeling misunderstood, guess what? They don't want to study. They don't want to learn. They don't want to even come to school. So again, it feeds and fuels what's going on with the pipeline, because now we have information that supports these statistics that define who we are. And with those statistics that define who we are, it leads us to continue being sentenced at a higher work because black men have anger issues. Black men are the problem. When the truth is, there are more incarcerated white males than African Americans.
Okay, now you preaching because I'm like, I'm learning too. Wow, really?
You know what? Systemically and across the board. Look at years ago, before there was cameras or or devices, right? We had newspapers that would say this black man did this and this black man did that and this black man was lynched for this and this happened. And a lot of those individuals had come back and they had to really change the narrative of what they were saying. Because what happened is some people, some newspapers, I forgot the name of the newspaper, I'll be more than happy to get it and give it to you, had to come back and make a public apology, in this one state, because they were reporting the white narrative and they was minimizing the black narrative that gave truth to a given situation. So therefore there was a lot of stories that was not being reported accurately. So therefore we have this misconception of who we are as a people based on false narrative that people put out there to justify the lynching and the killing of innocent black men.
So, beyond suspensions and expulsions, what are some of the less visible ways the school environment can contribute to the pipeline, such as lack of resources, inadequate counseling, or culturally insensitive teaching?
You hit it all, right? Those are the things that's really going on. We have implicit biases, and one of the things, that a lot of people don't realize that they have more racist tendencies because it's innate. It's part of who they are. And because they have this preconceived notion of a certain things, unbeknownst to them, because I tell people all the time, we would not have had an underground railroad if it wasn't for amazing white people. If it wasn't for people who have stepped up, who answered the cause to change the dynamics of what they saw was an injustice to black people. And those people haven't gone away. They've evolved to a lot more people, right? So with that being said, we have to identify who some of those individuals are versus who they're not. But also, some of them who do support us, they have to recognize and understand that based on race, on how they were raised, they do have, implicit biasness. They look at us differently. Some of them, I should say, look at us different as they do their counterparts, as they, view other ethnicities. And this happens in a school time after time. Let's go case in point. Can I say names?
Sure.
Lord, Tanya Ross was on her Facebook page the other day, and she made a very valuable point. We have a history of the past superintendent, right? He left the school district and he started working with an architecture company that the school board voted to help build some of these schools. Sitting back and looking at nepotism at its finest, looking at how friends and businesses can benefit off of the educational dollars versus putting those educational dollars where they need to do in terms of services, for these youth. Two individuals have ruined or really negatively impacted our school district, but yet you get a black men in key positions, you want to point fingers when they're not doing anything remotely compared to what your white counterparts have done. So this is, again, and this is not implicit biasness, this is just blatant racism. So we have to start calling spades by a spade. And a lot of people get upset with me because when there's a problem, they'll point a finger at that group while they're talking to their group. And when that other group is sitting there doing what they do, and they're pointing a finger at another group, right? They're pointing fingers at each other, but it's still mess going on in their own respective groups that they're not looking at. So a lot of people have an issue with me because I don't care what group you're in. I'm going to call a spade a spade. And a lot of people just don't like it. And that's where accountability comes into place. And a lot of us are not holding elected officials. We're not holding school board members. We're not holding teachers accountable for the things that they're doing that's causing our children to not have the level of support that they need. Now, let's look at Columbia, South Carolina. One of the schools in the district, I believe, is Richland 1 or 2. Again, I forgot which one. I know how to get there because they allow, guess what? Both of them allow mental health clinicians from the outside to come in to work with children because they understand that it's a huge need and they can't do it all. So why is it that Lancaster cannot allow private mental health agencies to come in to work with children? Because again, it's a part of being a part of the clique, and they're trying to preserve what's going on internally and that they don't want others to observe. So we have huge lacks in services, in the Lancaster Schools District because they want to control and maintain what's going on with those who have alliances with, who cannot provide the level of support that these children truly need. And what they need to do is get out their own way and allow other professionals in that's willing and able to do the work to give the children the level of support that they need to be successful and to stop the school to prison to grave pipeline.
How does the lack of diverse representation amongst teachers and administrators affect the experiences of African American students and potentially contribute to the problem?
I remember one day I went to the district office. So when I go in there, I'm sitting in the waiting room and I'm looking up. I'm like, what the hell? It's a woman in a field of cotton and she's picking it. And I said, why is this picture up here with this woman picking cotton? Excuse me, Jesus. But this heifer said to me, that's not cotton, it's pussy willow. Oh. Well, if it looked like a duck and it quacked like a duck, I'm going to call it what it is. It's a damn duck. You can define it what you want to define it, but guess what? It looks like cotton. And if it's not gone, I was going to make a report and also call the newspapers. I took a picture of it and I said it was going to be reported. It wasn't moved. The next time I came, it was moved. So again, that's an answer to your question, insensitivity. Right? Not being sensitive to the black plight, not being sensitive to black issues, which is why they're trying to remove the school books out of our schools, giving the true narrative of how we were subjected to slavery, beaten, raped, lynched, castrated, by, Caucasians who wanted to keep us suppressed and enslaved. So again, we still have this insensitivity because they're still attempting to suppress what we've gone through now through the academic channels. And again, when you don't have school officials standing up saying this is wrong, this needs to be taught, we need to, share the black narrative. It goes to show you how across the board there is implicit biases and there's also racism because they don't want the truth. So how can I sit down and represent someone when I'm trying to hide what we have as a people put them through here in this dirty South? So how is it that you can truly represent us? Are you giving us the best version of yourselves that you would give to another ethnicity, a non-black ethnicity, if you were teaching them? Are you teaching us as hard and as well as you would? Some of people, 100% yes. But the level of service that we're getting because of the lack of diversity and because we have been minimized, look at Lancaster High School in A.R. Rucker. A lot of individuals have removed their children from there. Now they're majority African American and Hispanics in both those schools, right? Because again, so what's going on? Why is the school not looking at these demographics, which they should, and giving extra supportive services, to ensure that the kids have the, what they need to succeed? So again, I believe they're working all collaboratively, in order to feed this fuel to prison pipeline grave pipeline, because when it comes to the prison, that equates to dollars.
That's absolutely true.
It equates to dollars.
absolutely true.
So we have to look at truly what's going on. Do we have great teachers in Lancaster? Hell yes. But do we have a poor administration that's working to overcome a lot of systemic racial disparities? 100%. But the problem is we still have the same board members, and those are the ones who should be held accountable, because not only do they allow it, a lot of them are just simply a part of it. And that's black, white, and they're not indifferent.
So as far as solutions and actionable steps, what are some proven effective strategies that school, communities, and policymakers can implement to disrupt the school to prison pipeline?
You know what? Wraparound services. We need to start. We have an agency or a few agencies. They're all part of one network. And this agency applied for $1 million grant and they put you in it. This agency applied for a $1.8 million grant, which is the police department, and they put certain people in it. The only individual who's working hard that I see in this community is Reverend Pelham.
Yes, shout out to Reverend Pelham.
Shout out Reverend Pelham.
Shout out to Reverend Pelham.
He has been doing the work, for a very long time. But when you look at the other network of individuals that's continuing to provide services, at what point do we say, why they continue to get millions of dollars in various grants and they're not bringing any changes, from the first grant? You can give so much fruit and turkey and have, after school programs where a lot of children were actually failing in those after school programs. So the district office pulled them in and said, this is what we're seeing. So then they required their staff to work more diligently with those students. Why weren't you doing that to begin with?
That's true.
So you have these organizations here in Lancaster playing on our heartstrings, sitting there manipulating us, acting like they're doing the work when the truth is they're just taking the money. So we have to remove those individuals. We have to stand up as a community and demand that the school district put in place programs that are truly working to affect and help children. I am still waiting on my FOIA, Lancaster School District. I specifically asked the Lancaster School District to give me the data that supports the effectiveness of every program that's providing direct services to children in Lancaster, in Lancaster County. I want to know what they are doing to what data are they collecting to determine how effective these programs are, because you have many of them that are not effective. And then what the school district will do is say to parents, well, we put your child in this program and they're still having these behaviors, knowing that those programs have a proven record of not being effective. So it's perpetuating a cycle. They have programs, with friends of the board members and friends of county people and friends of city council. All of these different friends and relatives have these amazing programs in the school, which is giving them hundreds and thousands of dollars. While these programs are known to not be effective. So with that being said, we have to educate parents on when and how to hold the school district responsible, because we've been exploited for far too long, and this needs to change, and those programs need to get out of our schools if they're not doing the work that the children truly need.
Whew.
We're going to stop this pipeline, and it starts with you.
Are there any organizations, initiatives, or resources that you would recommend to our listeners to explore or learn more about or get involved?
You know what? The powerhouse, Pastor Pelham,
Yes.
is the only organization I can refer someone to right now. However, I got on these knees, and I tell you guys, when I sit silent, and he tells me to do something, I move. So I've started a not-for-profit, Uprising Supportive Services. And it is trauma-informed services that's geared towards helping youth with disabilities and behavior concerns in an enrichment after-school therapeutic environment. We are going to be partnering with the Big Homie program, which is with Ben Henson, who does boxing. And he is going to implement, with me, a life skills development program.
All right, that's awesome.
So with that being said, children and their families will get not only mental health services, the best mental health services in the world, EMDR and brain spotting. We do use trauma-focused CBT, but that's more so a type of therapy that helps for stabilization. We want children to heal from what they're going through. So with that being said, the best two treatment therapies in the world are EMDR and brain spotting. The kids are going to get that here. The families are going to get that here. They're going to have tutoring services. We're looking to hire a nurse practitioner. We're looking to hire 4 behavior specialists to make sure that they specialize in terms of helping these children to modify these behavior. We're looking, for tutors. So again, we are going to build up our community one child out of, at a time, based off of what God said he would do. He delivers, and what he's doing, he's going to deliver through Uprising Social Services, because this is a place of God, and we have this community through the grace of God.
Amen. Well, Miss Ventour, thank you so much for coming on my platform. You're so knowledgeable.
And my eyes are watering because I get so passionate, because what they're doing to our youth by sitting down, finding grants to get millions of dollars, knowing that most of it is not going towards services. That needs to change, and it's going to change.
I appreciate you coming on my platform.
Oh, can I mention one more thing?
Go ahead.
And part of that change, I am running for your House of Representatives.
Woo woo!
And so with that being said, we have real work that needs to be done. This is another topic for another time. So if you will have me back, I would love to sit down to share with you how I envision Lancaster, South Carolina under my leadership.
And you coming back. What you mean if I will have you back? You are family. Don't do that.
Well, whenever you're ready, I would love to, share with Lancaster my vision, for Lancaster. And this is not about Republican. It's not about Democrat. It's not about black. It's not about white. It's about us being Lancaster.
Amen. Well, thank you again. And I look forward to us setting up something and scheduling you to come back.
Yes, ma'am.
And I love you and I appreciate you.
I love you too.
And to my guests, I love you all too. And make sure you stay tuned. Be blessed.
Peace and blessings.